Hi everyone, I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Hi there everybody, welcome back to Adaptable. This is the show where we slow things down and we get curious about behavior and focus on understanding rather than pathologizing, blaming, or judging. In the last episode, we talked about addiction through a trauma-informed lens, and not as a moral failing or lack of willpower, but as an adaptation to pain, disconnection, unmet needs, and emotional distress. Today, I want to build on that conversation and talk about how trauma-informed recovery, specifically how EMDR therapy works with addiction, and why healing the root of addiction changes everything. This episode is for anyone who's ever wondered if addiction isn't the real problem, if you aren't fully subscribed to a disease or a medical model, and how do we actually heal from addiction. So if you are someone who struggles with addiction or overuse or misuse of substances or love someone who does, then this is probably a good show for you. So here's something I want you to hear right away. You cannot shame your nervous system into healing. And you cannot logic your way out of trauma-based coping. It's not possible. We're not wired for it. And recovery doesn't happen by forcing someone to stop using. It happens by helping the nervous system no longer need to use. Using substances is a symptom of the problem that's greater and it's deeper. I want to help educate you on why trauma-informed recovery matters. And a lot of inpatient places and recovery facilities don't offer the trauma support and the healing that's needed to make relapse not just be a default thing that happens. So when addiction is treated without addressing trauma, people are often asked to give up the only thing that has ever helped them regulate. And they're not given any other way to manage distress in their nervous system. And that's why relapse is so common. Not because people don't care, it's not because people don't want to get better, but because their nervous systems are still stuck in that survival mode. And so trauma-informed recovery asks us different questions. It's what happened to you? When did you start using? How is it beneficial? What did your nervous system learn? And how do we need to help your brain access more adaptive information so that you can remember the natural consequences that are more negative than the positive feelings that go with the use or the escape or the relief? And so this is where EMDR becomes especially powerful because we can uncouple the positive feelings that have worked so that they don't have such a stronghold. So let me give you a little background. EMDR really addresses the nervous system and the brain. And it is short for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And historically, it's known more widely acceptable for PTSD, but it's incredibly effective in addiction, in recovery, and trauma that's at the roots of often why people use. And we understand addiction as trauma-linked learning. So addictive behaviors become paired with positive internal states. Like I said, relief, calm, numbing, belonging, freedom, control. And over time, our brain learns, this is how I survive. This is what gets me out of that feeling I was having before I used the substance. EMDR doesn't rip that belief away. It just updates the BIOS. And so we don't necessarily just use standard protocols as therapists for addiction presenting issues. There are several additional addiction-specific protocols that a trained EMDR skilled physician, a trained EMDR skilled clinician uses that is helpful in trauma-informed recovery. So I'm going to break down a couple of those that I like and I use the most when I'm dealing with someone who wants to eliminate their pull towards addictive behavior. And one of them is called DETOUR. It stands for desensitization of triggers and urge, and we reprocess those things specifically. So DETOUR works by targeting present-day triggers and urges rather than diving straight into trauma memories. And this protocol helps our brain reduce intensity of cravings. It disconnects the urges from the promise of that relief, and it strengthens internal resources for choice and for safety. So that's not the first call that we make when we are struggling. And as urges lose their charge, the nervous system begins to recognize, I don't actually need this to survive, and I might have a greater access to another broader menu of choices to deal with what I'm currently feeling. So this isn't about willpower, it's about regulation. And I find it really helpful because a lot of the times when people use, they now have the use paired with other behaviors. For example, people who like to drink on a Friday because it's happy hour at 5 o'clock. People who want to sit by the pool with cocktails. People who play softball, but they have a few beers while they're doing that, or any other sport. Some people like to have a couple of drinks and then go for a bike ride. And all of a sudden, these behaviors that are decent, fun, standalone behaviors are now coupled with now using a substance to change the way the state is held. And so those urges get locked in as part of our memory. And so now people think, I don't like to ride my bike unless I have a couple drinks, or I don't want to do this other thing without, having a drink or a smoke or, a hit from their marijuana or whatever it is that they do. Sometimes people even have these connections related to like, I can't sleep without ... You fill in the blank for whatever works for you, and never relearn. Their nervous system doesn't learn to get to a relaxed, calm state without the substance. And so there's a retraining that has to take place. There's another feeling state. There's another protocol that I really like. It's called the feeling state addiction protocol. And this is another angle on how positive emotions get stuck in the nervous system that correspond with substance uses. And that feeling state addiction protocol focuses on positive feeling states that are associated with that use. This is the part of our brain that says, this works. I feel better when. This makes things feel okay or tolerable. And so the feeling state addiction protocol gently disconnects the substance or the behavior from that positive internal experience. Just like negative feelings get stuck with memory and latched on and encoded, well, positive things do too. Think about your first kiss and the cologne the person was wearing, or perfume. Or think about Thanksgiving and grandma's apple pie, and how now Thanksgiving and fall has all of these associations with specific smells. That's how our memory works, and things get encoded positively and negatively. And so when we work to disconnect that positive internal experience, it allows our brain to access the entire truth of the scenario, which then includes the negative consequences of the use, whether they're health or relational, the losses, and the long-term impact of overuse or abuse with a substance. And this isn't because of shame, but it's through integration of the adaptive information that isn't accessible at the time of the use. So what happens after the positive feeling is uncoupled? Because some people are afraid of that. They're like, I don't want to not have this access point or this crutch or this barrier that helps me manage, and I don't know what else I'm going to do or how I'm going to feel when that doesn't work anymore. And this is one of the most important and often misunderstood parts of trauma-informed recovery when it comes to substance use. Because once the positive associations with use are uncoupled, the nervous system no longer has to defend the addiction. That part that says it's just a little, or I don't do it that much, or I do everything else well, so this is fine. That part is now way more available for a person to make better choices. And that's when something more profound happens. There's space. There's cravings that soften, and the urgency decreases, and the brain becomes available for much deeper healing. And so then what happens from therapist's perspective is accessing the real reasons that the use started in the first place. The use is just a buffer. It's a barrier that prevents us from getting access to the reason we needed to use in the first place. And so once addiction is no longer that primary regulator in the nervous system, memories often become more easily accessible and they surface. And it's not because we have to force them, but because the nervous system finally feels safe enough to tell the truth about what's really going on. And this is when we start to ask the questions that matter the most. Why did this start in the first place? When was the first time that I used? When did it feel so effective and beneficial? And how did that then get connected? Something that I've seen so many times with feeling state addiction is with drinking and marijuana use. It typically started in early adolescence. The person was feeling like they didn't fit or they didn't belong, and they found a group of people that were willing to do this together, and they developed connection, they developed friends, they developed a group of people that understood also what they were going through. And so the behavior of drinking or marijuana use at that age became connection. And then later, what they learn is in their relationships, in their partnerships, where the drinking is taking place or the marijuana use is taking place, that it actually creates disconnection. But because of the way that it got paired when they were in adolescence, the brain won't give that up just yet. And so for many people, substance use began as a way to survive those disconnected moments, those overwhelming homes, and really a buffer for chronic stress. So again, we have chronic stress or overwhelming emotions, potentially neglect or abuse, maybe unprocessed loss or grief or betrayals. And that messages a lack of safety or a lack of attunement. So addiction didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of experience that didn't get fully processed or handled in a healthful way with loving, caregiving people that could be there for the person in the first place. And people who have a lot of use issues tend to be really sensitive in general. So it's not just that they had more bad things happen to them, but those bad things felt so much more raw. And they are so vulnerable. And so in EMDR, we understand that trauma is a maladaptively encoded memory network. And these are the experiences that were stored without that resolution or the integration of positive things and adaptive things. And these memories aren't just the stories that we remember, they live in our body. Trauma is cellularly stored, and those memories drive beliefs and emotions and behaviors in present time. With trauma, it's like a time orientation issue. We feel like the past is present. We behave and act as if then is now. And so once addiction is no longer blocking that access, EMDR allows us to target those unfinished, unresolved, maladaptively encoded memories more effectively. So those original moments of fear or shame or abandonment, or those beliefs that formed, I'm not safe, I'm not enough, I'm alone, that unfinished stress response held in the body can then make its way to full resolution. And we use bilateral stimulation and other forms of taxing working memory to help with that. And I've got other shows that better describe EMDR earlier in season 1. So go ahead and check that out. And we can drop what is EMDR in the description below to make that easier to find. But when we do this, the brain can finally do what it could at the time, which is process and integrate and really resolve the distress that wasn't able to get its due. And so symptoms no longer need to work so hard, and we don't need those unhelpful or maladaptive adaptations or coping skills to use. That's the good part, right? And this is the part that surprises people the most. It's like, I don't need that, or I don't even want that. So when trauma is healed and it's not just being managed or suppressed, but it's actually fully resolved, those symptoms of overuse or addiction behaviors that once protected us no longer need to be in charge. They don't have to work so hard. So then our cravings decrease, and it's not because of discipline. It's not white knuckling it, and it's not just willpower, but it's because the nervous system isn't so desperate for that relief. Overuse and misuse soften because that original wound has been addressed. So recovery becomes less about resisting urges and more about not needing them in the first place. And this isn't about taking something away. It's about giving the nervous system what it needed all along. So trauma-informed recovery is not fast, it's not linear, and it's not about perfection. It's about really addressing the full person. And it's really the most honoring, full, whole human approach. Healing doesn't happen by forcing abstinence before safety. It happens by restoring safety so that abstinence becomes possible. So here's what I want you to take away from today. Addiction is learned, and learned things can be unlearned. Healing happens when safety comes first, and EMDR doesn't erase coping. It updates it. And when trauma heals, the symptoms or the overuse or the misuse doesn't have to carry the emotional load or the stress load anymore. So if you've been hard on yourself or someone that you love, please remember that your coping made sense, their coping made sense, and your nervous system was doing its best, and healing is still possible. So if this episode helped you see addiction or recovery differently, please share it with someone who might need this information, because hope is grounded in compassion. And be sure to like or subscribe to the show or leave a comment if you found this useful, because your engagement helps trauma-informed conversations reach people who needed it the most. And as always, until next time, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.